Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first and favorite, I'm going to decree that, sake podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is John Puma from the Sake Notes. Also, I'm the guy that runs the internet Sake Discord. It's a fun place to come down and learn about sake with some fun people.
And I'm your host, Timothy Sullivan. I'm a sake samurai, sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be here tasting and also chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
Excellent. Tim, I love tasting and talking about all things sake with you. It's a wonderful thing that I get to do every week. And we're going a little literal to this week. We're going to be tasting and talking about things sake.
Yes.
So you want to give the listeners a little bit of a rundown of what I mean by that.
Well, we have been noticing that sake topics have been popping up in the actual news lately. So we thought it was high time we did sake in the news. So here we are. And to facilitate this, we're going to start off by introducing our sakes first, sip on them while we discuss the largest news stories to hit our shores about Japanese sake.
Ah, I love it. This is nice. This is interesting. This is pretty cool. Do we have anybody in the field? Do we have a helicopter or anything like that? Or is the budget not quite there yet?
I wish I could do like one of those TikTok podcaster voices, but I can't. This just in. That's all you're going to get.
Hold on, I'm hearing that there has been a delivery of G-Con.
We're going to John Puma in the field, the rice field.
Live. I like it. It.
All right, John. So we're going to talk about our sakes first. Yes. So tell me, what sake did you bring today to talk about the news?
I have a sake that is very, very near and dear to my heart.
Oh.
Yeah. So the sake that I am going to be drinking today is actually the very first seasonal nama I ever tasted. Mm-hmm. It is the Oyama Natsu Tokubetsu Junmai Nama sake. And this was when I was first kind of getting into sake. I would go over to Sakaya every now and again and see what was new and what they had. And I was already a big fan of Oyama. Oyama is a brand of sake out of Yamagata, and they always had it. Like when I was first getting into sake, it was everywhere. Like you can really find Oyama in New York pretty easily, and I really, really enjoyed it. And they're not your typical Yamagata fare. It's not the big fruit bomb, but I really enjoyed their Tokubetsu Junmai. And I remember being at Sakaya one day, and they got a bottle of Oyama that had a completely different color scheme than the usual. And I was like, what is this all about? And they were like, oh, this is the Nama. And I was like, what does that even mean? And they told me, oh, this is unpasteurized, blah, 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 blah. And I bought a bottle, I took it home, and it blew my mind. I'd never had unpasteurized sake before. And it was so exciting that every year I'd go back and I'd buy like 2 or 3 bottles. And then abruptly after 2011, it stopped coming. And it hasn't been available here for me. At least on the East Coast, I've been able to get it since 2011. I actually have a photo of the last bottle of Oyama Nama I ever had. Being able to have this again is exciting for me. And so I wanted to share my enthusiasm with the people at home and talk about it on today's show.
Great. So why don't you give us the stats for your sake?
Great. So this is using Dewa no Sato rice for both the koji and the kakemai. The polishing ratio is 60%. The brewery name is actually, even though the brand is Oyama, they're most known for that, the brewery is actually Kato Kachahiro Shuzo. The sake meter value, that measure of dry to sweet, is plus 1.5, so barely a touch on the dry side. The alcohol percentage is 15.5. The acidity is 1.6, and as pointed out earlier, this is a Nama, Tokubetsu Junmai Nama.
And you said it was a Natsu.
Right. So this is their summer Nama.
Natsu means summer.
I don't actually put it on the English label. It's still just Nama for this, but good stuff.
All right. So the sake that I brought today is the Izumibashi Megumi Blue Label Junmai Ginjo. So Izumibashi Shuzo is out of Kanagawa Prefecture, and their kind of symbol for their brand is the dragonfly. And in Japan, it's well known that the dragonfly only survives and does well in around the purest water sources. So that's one of the reasons that's a symbol for their brand. They're using Yamada Nishiki rice for this Megumi Blue Label, polished down to 58%. Our SMV, sake meter value, is a +7. Acidity is 1.5. Alcohol is 16%. And yeah, so I'm really excited to taste this sake as well.
Excellent. +7. That's going to be a little more on the drier side of things.
Yeah, it's a little up there, but you never know. We got to taste it and see how it blends with all those other factors that go in. So I'm going to go ahead and get mine open. You should as well. And let's pour them in the glass and do our sake ASMR.
All right.
Okay. So do you want to give yours a taste first?
Sure thing. Well, first I'm going to take a look at it, and it is almost completely transparent. Just a tiny, 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 tiny hint of color. And on the nose, we've got a little bit of tropical fruit, but not overwhelming. It's there, but it's not beating you over the head with it. Again, this brewery doesn't really do the traditional Yamagata fruit bomb. And on the taste, a lot more of that tropical fruit, a little bit more of a citrus on there. It's got a nice little zip going on. It's really bright and fresh. And then it's got this really nice crisp, dry finish that, Tim, I think you'll very much appreciate with your love of Niigata sake. And I think that we've talked about before how that crisp, dry finish makes you just ready to have another sip, and that makes this sake dangerous.
Yes. And right up your alley, I think.
Yes, very much so, very much so. A lot of fruit, a nice crisp finish, and you're ready for round 2.
And you're on the couch.
You're on the couch, yes.
All right. Well, I'll give mine a smell as well. So it has a richer kind of aroma to it. A little more concentrated, not bright, fresh, and tropical, but a little bit, just a hint of rice in there, a little bit richer, and depth of aroma is how I would describe it. And now I'm gonna give it a taste. All right. So it's very smooth. It's not super dry. It has just, for me, there's a hint of sweetness up front, and the dryness really comes on the finish. It's got a lot of depth and richness to it. Almost tastes like a little bit like an aged sake in the best possible way. Like there's a depth of flavor, layers to the flavor, and a bit of concentrated deliciousness to the mid palate. And it finishes kind of dry, but there's a little bit of weight and heft that I really like here. So it's not summery, fresh, and playful. It's a little bit more concentrated and rich, but I really, really like it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, now that we are a little primed,
yes,
let's talk about the news.
Okay. So these are some news stories that involve sake that have come to our shores. That basically means that there was an English language news article about them.
So we're not digging into the Japanese sources just yet.
We're not digging into the Japanese sources. And John, what's the headline we're looking at?
Well, Tim, we have this article from Sora News 24 that a Japanese sake brewery is actually making their first carbon neutral sake. This article was published on July 27th. Of this year, and Kobe Shushinkan, who make Fukuju, very popular sake here, they are making a carbon emission free, a carbon neutral sake. the Fukuju Junmaishu Echo Zero. So they're putting it right in the branding. I like that. They switched their energy sources to Kobe's non-fossil burning sources for electricity. And they're using carbon neutral liquefied gas to run the brewing. They've also taken a lot of steps around the brewery to reduce energy consumption. So things like LED lighting. Mm-hmm. Guys, if you're not using LED lighting at home, start using LED lighting at home.
What are you even doing?
What are you even doing? If you hate changing light bulbs, get LEDs. You will never have to change a light bulb as long as you are alive. So another thing they're doing is they're actually they're reducing the milling rate a little bit. They're only milling it down to 80% instead of the usual 70%. Mm-hmm. And here's an interesting bit, and I wonder what kind of impact it will have on the product. No Shubo, Tim.
Oh, no fermentation starter.
No fermentation starter. Instead, they're going to use dry yeast to reduce the environmental burden and speed up the entire brewing process. That's the quote from the article. The bottles themselves do not have any labels. Instead, they're going to use lead-free ink applied directly to the bottle. Honestly, I kind of love it when my sake bottles don't have labels and instead have stuff kind of painted right on it. I think that's really cool. Yep. So, yay. And this is their first step. This brewery, during lockdown, they did a little bit of a tour, and I got to sit in on that. And they talked a little bit about how in the future they wanted to do some carbon neutral brewing, and this is the result of that. And I think that's really interesting that they're putting, they went and said this, and they're kind of putting their money where their mouth is, and they're going forward and making changes.
Yeah, I think this type of action is not inexpensive for a brewery to do.
No.
And somebody has to be the leader and step forward to make this more of the norm versus a newsworthy exception. So I really applaud them for taking these steps and putting emphasis on this. And for every industry, I mean, I think in Japan, sake brewing is a small but culturally important industry. Mm-hmm. And if more breweries follow this lead, it's going to inspire larger industries to do this as well, because sake brewing is a standard bearer for Japanese culture. They're greatly respected culturally in Japan. And as we've talked about many times, they have super long histories going back centuries in many cases. So I think it's great when breweries like this step up and do something that is really forward thinking.
Yeah, and I am very curious to see how this is going to turn out for them. Like, what's this carbon zero sake going to taste like? I'm excited. I want to know.
That's a good question. Like, we can't ignore that question.
Yeah.
So it's going to be milled to 80%, you said. Mm-hmm. And I think with modern milling techniques, 80% is not what it used to be, right?
Exactly. That is exactly the point. I mean, I want to say that maybe even 5 or 10 years ago, if your sake was milled to less than 70%, it would be really hard to get kind of ginjo flavors or anything like that out of it. It becomes very difficult. But these days, with modern milling techniques and honestly modern rice growing techniques, they're able to get into a place where you can get away with doing less milling and still have a product that's doing exactly what you want it to do. And this brewery, Tim, you pointed out that sake breweries have been around for a really long time, and we like talking about that. This sake brewery has actually been around since 1751, and they're paving the way for this.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. The article also said that they want to have emission-free or carbon-neutral brewing for their entire lineup by 2030 and extend this to their supply chain by 2050.
Supply chain part's going to be tricky.
Yeah.
Some of that, will be a little bit out of their control, but that I think we all have to do that. We have to, that's the future. We've got to get to a place where that is, or else, our future will become very limited. Yeah.
But it seems hard to argue with this being an awesome, amazing thing that they're doing.
It's, this is the kind of news thing that you have to just cheer for. You really want this to be successful.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like all the things you mentioned in the article are individually may not be big things, but like switching from a paper label with glue to kind of electrostatic printing or whatever they're doing on the bottle. Like in and of itself, that might not save the planet, but it's all these little steps that add up and create a real impact.
Yes, exactly. They're not going to reinvent the wheel the very first try out. It's going to be, little bits and pieces. This is the perfect is the enemy of the good, and they're doing lots of little good things. It's going to get us where we need to go.
Yes. I think a comparison might be maybe to the U.S. the EV industry in the U.S., like making electric cars. 15 years ago, people were like, oh my God, that's a pipe dream. What are you talking about? And it was like the fringe weirdo crunchy granola freaks were driving electric cars. But now it's becoming so mainstream, and by 2030 and 2050, I think electric cars are going to be all around. So this is really leaning into that trend and, again, that forward-thinking mentality. So I think it's wonderful. Do you think that is a reliable comparison?
I think so. And I think that it goes to show how quickly things can change also. I think that, as you pointed out, maybe 10 years ago, it was extremely unusual to see an electric vehicle. I guess back then maybe hybrids were more of a thing.
That's true.
We've gotten so far so quickly. And I think that, by 10, 20 years out, it's going to be, I think we're going to get to a point before we know it where it's a little weird to see gas vehicles. It's that, one of those. So, we'll see how it goes.
What do you think about brewers changing their process in ways that save energy, save the amount of time it takes? Do you think that takes away from the flavor, or are we going to have to wait and see?
I think we're going to have to wait and see. I think that Toji's and Kuramoto's have a lot of tricks up their sleeve.
Yes, they do.
And, we'll see what they do. I think that the breweries, as you pointed out earlier, have a long history, and they are very important to the culture. And I think that what they produce is really just as important for them.
Yeah.
And I think that it is very top of mind for them to try to maintain the personality and the flavor profile that they have been making for years.
It would be interesting if we could go back in time 130 years and the sake brewers at Kobe Shushinkan, if they're like, well, we've got wooden tanks now and there's these new stainless steel tanks coming out, I don't know if we should switch. And they're having this conversation about the new technology coming in. And it's so interesting. Like, we don't even think twice about that change now.
No.
But it could be in 70 years from now, 100 years from now, paper labels are this thing like, oh my God, can you believe they used to do that? And how wasteful that was. And, it's interesting. Like, we inhabit our place in history, and we're on a continuum here. And I really welcome any new ideas. And I don't know, I just get really excited about things like this. So I think this is a really fun story to follow. And I've had the opportunity to visit this brewery twice. And I'm so glad that they're changing their source of energy and coming up with all these ideas to be a more earth-friendly business. And again, that's a position of leadership, and I'm really proud of that. I think that's fantastic.
Wonderful. I had plans to visit this brewery for my trip to Japan in 2021, but that, that didn't happen. So, Tim, we've got one more news story.
Yes. A bit more breaking news. Yeah.
And buckle up, folks. This is going to be an interesting one.
Okay, so here's the headline. Japan urges its young people to drink more to boost economy. Now, many news outlets covered this story.
Oh, yeah. Everybody's got this article.
Yep, this is the New York Times. I have a link to it as well from the BBC. This was published on August 18th, 2022. And here's the scoop. So, obviously, as everyone knows, the population in Japan is shrinking. About 1/3, 29% of Japan's population is 65 years of age or older. And this is the highest older population in the world. The younger generation is drinking less sake. And this has had an impact on the taxes that are collected from alcoholic beverages. Now, the alcohol industry in Japan is regulated by the National Tax Agency. And they've come up with a bit of, shall I say, a controversial idea. They're holding a national competition to come up with business plan ideas to reverse this trend. It's called Sake Viva, and it's a campaign to ask people to come up with business plans to attract more attention to the sake and alcohol industries. So the contest asks 20 to 39-year-olds specifically to share their business ideas to kickstart demand among their peers. This could be for sake, shochu, whiskey, wine, or beer. And the goal of this effort is to increase tax revenue on alcohol, which has shrunk over the years. According to the Japan Times newspaper, in 1980, 5% of the tax agency revenue came from alcohol. And in 2020, it's down to 1.7%.
Ooh.
Yeah, so this has received mixed reception, to say the least.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I'm of two minds on this. Number one, I love sake. So you obviously want to see sake flourish, and you want to encourage things that are going to theoretically help sake to flourish. On the other hand, government campaigns to encourage young people to drink is a weird thing. At least for me, I think it's a weird idea. And by weird, I mean, it's like a little uncomfortable to me. You know, it's a little strange. A huge amount of Japan's, like a large amount of Japan's economy, and honestly, like a lot of the social structure is built around drinking in a lot of cases. You know, there are literally tens of thousands of izakayas all over the place in Japan. You can trip and fall into one on any street. And if you have another generation coming in that's not partaking, then that has a possibly catastrophic effect on that economy, on that business model. So that it's very much, you know, based on the idea that people are going to come in there and drink every night. A lot of the office culture is also based on drinking, going after hours and having drinks with coworkers and stuff like that. And people not drinking, it has ramifications across the board for their entire culture.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to understand that there's a unique position for alcohol consumption in business situations like you were just outlining. I think in Japan, the idea of drinking with coworkers, it's almost, in some scenarios, it's like an expectation that you're going to go out socially and seal a business deal over some type of drinking. So in Japanese society, there's this backdrop to this. So I think for people outside of Japan who hear this, that the tax agency is encouraging business plans to get more young people to drink, it may sound strange to people outside of Japan, but please understand that there's this cultural backdrop to this. That, you know, you and I have been to Japan a lot, and we've been in the industry for a while, and you know, there's an underlying cultural expectation that business people are going to drink together. You see that very, very commonly. On the other hand,
there are entire neighborhoods built around the idea that people are going to, salarymen and salarywomen are going to go out after work and drink.
Yes.
And that's like, you know, entire neighborhoods. It's hard to, guys, work with me for a moment here. There are entire neighborhoods that are built on the idea that people are going to go drinking after work. That's a district where they all go. And it's a weird thing to consider, but imagine, you know, like there's probably neighborhoods in your city where there's bars and that are kind of in a group. And if suddenly people weren't going drinking, those bars close down, and it does bad things for the general local economy.
Well, let's talk about the other side of the coin, the uncomfortable side of the coin, which is...
It's a very uncomfortable side of this coin, Tim.
We all know that alcohol consumption is not healthy for us. It's a choice we make to enjoy. And studies come out all the time of the negative impact of overconsumption of alcohol. There's societal costs, there's health costs, and it is something that needs to be done in moderation.
Yes.
I think we can all agree that it's important to keep an eye on moderation for this type of enjoyment and consumption. Mm-hmm. The costs can be devastating to families. It can have economic costs if people become addicted to alcohol. And this proposal by the tax agency to get young people to come up with these business plans is not just focused on Japanese sake, shochu, whiskey, beer, or wine. So it is any alcohol is involved in this. And I think for you and me, we're specifically interested in sake. Compared to shochu and whiskey, sake is a lower alcohol alternative, and it's not distilled, and it is a traditional, culturally relevant craft in Japan. So for me, I often focus on that aspect of it. The Cultural Affairs Council in Japan has decided to propose Japanese sake brewing as a candidate for the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage listing. So they want to list sake brewing as a cultural practice of value to be honored by UNESCO. And that speaks differently to this craft of making sake. So there's a cultural significance in my mind to sake, but they're promoting here whiskey, wine, beer, all kinds of alcohol, and they just want to make more tax revenue and get more young people drinking.
Yep.
I don't think that necessarily honors the craft of sake brewing.
Not necessarily, no.
Not necessarily, maybe. Well, I will say I'm curious about what these younger people are going to propose to make alcohol consumption more attractive to younger people. But my point of view would be like taking a cultural approach to it. And that really, for me, leans more to sake and shochu, like honoring those traditions. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah. I think that in my mind should be the focus. And that's in no small part due to the time I spend doing this show and, my personal hobbies. Mm. Obviously I want to see sake be healthy and, it'd be great if this carried it along.
Well, we hit some major headlines that have come to Japan in the last month or so.
Yeah. Unfortunately, you may have noticed that none of them were, hey guys, we're opening up the borders soon. But we're keeping our eyes open for that one. But it'll one day, ladies and gentlemen, one day they will let us back in.
And how have you enjoyed your Oyama summer Tokubetsu Junmai unpasteurized sake? How's it been?
It's fantastic. And, I have to say, kind of enjoy this drinking the sake at the beginning of the episode thing, Tim. Maybe we should give it another shot one of these days.
Absolutely. I've been enjoying my Izumibashi Junmai Ginjo, the blue label. Very delicious. Yeah, so this has been fun. And this is going to be a series. So in a few weeks, we might have another news segment coming up with new headlines from Japan. And we're going to bring you the latest and greatest sake news. So stay tuned for that.
Excellent.
All right. John, great to taste with you. This was a lot of fun, our first Sake in the News episode. I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the news as well. And as always, I'd like to say hello and thank you to our patrons as well. Now, if you would like to support the Sake Revolution podcast, you can join us on Patreon. Please visit patreon.com/sakerevolution to learn more about supporting our podcast.
And if you have questions, comments, if you came across any news about Japanese sake that you think we should talk about in our next episode, please send it over to us over at feedback@sakerevolution.com. You can also get at us on most forms of social media. Not quite doing the TikTok thing yet, but we're getting there. One day.
We keep threatening.
We keep threatening, yes. I think we're legally too old to be doing TikTok, but we'll see. But anyway, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you, Tim, for joining me again today. Everybody, please raise your glass. Remember to keep drinking sake and kanpai.